I'm Allison, 30, and the moment I walked into the courtroom, my mother laughed under her breath and my dad shook his head. They sat directly behind my soon-to-be ex-husband Craig, a united front against me. Their betrayal cut deeper than anything I'd ever experienced, worse than discovering Craig's affairs or his financial manipulation. My own parents, choosing him over me, over their grandson Jackson. The court clerk called the room to order as I straightened my shoulders. What they didn't know was that I had finally found proof of what they'd all been hiding from me for years. Before I tell you how my entire family conspired against me and how I fought back, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. This story changed everything I thought I knew about family loyalty. If you've ever felt betrayed by those closest to you, hit subscribe because this journey of discovering the truth might help you recognize the signs I missed. Now, let me take you back to where it all began. I grew up in Greenwich, Connecticut, in a sprawling colonial home with manicured gardens and a view of the Long Island Sound. To outsiders, the Watson family represented old money and respectability. My mother, Eleanor, chaired 3 charitable foundations and my father, Richard, ran a successful investment firm that had been in the family for generations. They were fixtures in Connecticut's social scene, names that opened doors and commanded respect. But behind our imposing front doors, life was different. Nothing I did was ever quite good enough. My grades were excellent but Jennifer scored higher. My tennis was competitive but not championship material. My college acceptance to Cornell was acceptable, though not Harvard. I grew up feeling like I was perpetually disappointing them, always measuring myself against impossible standards. When I was 25, my parents hosted their annual charity gala for children's education. That's where I met Craig Miller. He was 35, charming, with a confident smile and impeccable credentials, Wharton MBA, successful investment portfolio, and a family background my parents instantly approved of. He approached me at the bar, commented on my architectural sketch I was absent-mindedly drawing on a cocktail napkin, and we talked for hours about design philosophy. Our courtship was a whirlwind. Within 2 months, Craig was accompanying me to family dinners. My mother, normally critical of everyone I brought home, was surprisingly enthusiastic. "He's exactly what this family needs," she told me after our 3rd dinner together. My father invited Craig to his club, introduced him to business associates, treated him more like a son than my actual brother James ever experienced. Looking back, I should have questioned their eager acceptance. When Craig proposed after just 4 months, my parents were thrilled. They immediately took over wedding planning, the venue, the guest list, even my dress. I was swept along, interpreting their enthusiasm as happiness for me rather than the calculated move it was. The wedding was featured in Connecticut Society magazine. 8 months later, I gave birth to our son, Jackson. From the outside, we were the picture-perfect family. Craig's investment firm began working closely with my father's company on several large projects. Our brownstone in the city and weekend home in the Hamptons completed the image of success. The cracks appeared gradually. First, it was Craig questioning why I needed to meet my college friends for dinner. "They're all single, living such different lives from you now," he'd say. Then he suggested I scale back my architectural work. "Jackson needs his mother, not a nanny," though he himself worked 70-hour weeks. My social circle shrank, phone calls with friends became less frequent. Despite reducing my workload to part-time consulting, I was still earning well. Yet I noticed Craig had started managing our joint accounts exclusively. When I asked for access to our financial statements, he'd brush it off. "You hate dealing with money, Allie. Let me handle the stress." One evening, I came home early from a client meeting to find Craig and my mother in our kitchen, speaking in hushed tones. I paused in the hallway. "She's getting restless, asking about the accounts," Craig said. My mother sighed. "Eleanor has always been stubborn. You need to keep her in line, focused on Jackson and the house. Richard says the Westport deal is almost ready. We can't have her causing problems now." I backed away silently, confused and hurt. What deal were they talking about? And why did my mother call me Eleanor, her own name, instead of Allison? It was the first clear indication that something was very wrong in my perfect life. By our third anniversary, the control Craig exerted over my life had become suffocating. What started as gentle suggestions about my schedule transformed into outright demands. When I attempted to reconnect with my former architecture firm about a downtown project, Craig sabotaged the meeting by scheduling a last-minute essential dinner with clients that required my presence. "Your priority should be supporting my career and raising Jackson," he insisted later that night. "This architecture hobby is distracting you from what's important." "It's not a hobby, Craig. It's my profession, my degree, my passion," I argued back. His expression changed then, a coldness I'd begun to recognize. "You're becoming hysterical over nothing. This is exactly why I worry about your judgment lately." That word, hysterical, became his favorite weapon. Any disagreement, any assertion of independence was dismissed as me being emotional or unstable. I began doubting myself, wondering if my perceptions were wrong. Meanwhile, our financial situation grew increasingly opaque. Despite our apparent wealth, the properties, the vacations, Craig's supposedly thriving business partnership with my father, I noticed strange discrepancies. Credit card statements showed large withdrawals I couldn't account for. When I questioned a $50,000 transfer to an account I didn't recognize, Craig exploded. "Do you think I'm stealing from you?" he shouted, flipping his dinner plate onto the floor. "After everything I've done for this family? Your paranoia is getting out of control, Allison." Jackson, then 3, started crying from his high chair. As I soothed our son, Craig stormed out, leaving me to clean up both the literal and emotional mess. Late that night, my phone buzzed with an email notification, not addressed to me, but to Craig. His accounts were synced to our home tablet, which I rarely used. The subject line caught my eye: weekend arrangements. From my cousin Rebecca. My hand shook as I opened it. The message was brief but devastating: "Same hotel as last time? Can't wait to feel you again. R." When I confronted Craig the next morning, he executed a masterclass in gaslighting. He laughed, told me Rebecca was helping arrange a surprise weekend for my upcoming birthday. When I showed him the suggestive language, he switched tactics. "You're spying on my emails now? This paranoia is exactly what I've been worried about. Maybe you should talk to Dr. Matthews about adjusting your medication." I wasn't on any medication. Desperate and confused, I called my mother, hoping for support or at least clarity. "Marriages have rough patches, Allison," she said dismissively. "Craig works so hard for your family. Perhaps you should focus on being a better wife instead of creating problems." My father was even worse. "Female hysteria isn't attractive, Allison. Craig's a good man dealing with a lot of pressure. Stop making his life harder with these wild accusations." Isolated and doubting my own perceptions, I made a decision I hadn't thought myself capable of. I hired a private investigator, paying from a small personal account I'd maintained from my architectural consulting work. The PI, a retired detective named Frank Rossi, promised discretion. 2 weeks later, Frank presented me with a file that shattered what remained of my illusions. Photos of Craig and Rebecca entering a hotel together, time-stamped from multiple occasions over the past year. But that wasn't all. Frank had followed financial leads too. Something about the large transfers had piqued his professional curiosity. "There's a pattern of money moving between accounts connected to your husband and your father," Frank explained, showing me diagrams of fund transfers. "I can't tell exactly what they're doing without more access, but it looks suspicious. Possibly tax evasion, possibly something worse." Armed with this evidence, I confronted Craig one evening after Jackson was asleep. I laid out the photos on our kitchen island, along with the financial records. For a moment, Craig stared in silence. Then his face transformed into something I'd never seen before: raw fury. "You stupid bitch," he hissed, sweeping the evidence onto the floor. "You have no idea what you're messing with." He grabbed my wrist hard enough to leave bruises, backing me against the refrigerator. "If you think anyone will believe you over me and your father, you're delusional. Who do you think the courts will give Jackson to? A paranoid, unemployed mother or a successful businessman with the support of the child's grandparents? That night, after Craig finally fell asleep, I packed essential items for Jackson and myself. I transferred what money I could access to my private account, gathered the evidence Frank had provided, and slipped out before dawn. As I buckled Jackson into his car seat, still in his dinosaur pajamas and clutching his favorite stuffed triceratops, I had no idea that I was starting a battle that would expose generations of family secrets. I found temporary refuge with my college roommate, Melissa Parker, now a paralegal at Hamilton and Associates. Her one-bedroom apartment in New Haven wasn't ideal. Jackson and I shared the pull-out couch, but it was safe. Melissa's legal background proved invaluable as she helped me navigate those first chaotic days. "You need an attorney who won't be intimidated by your father's connections," Melissa said on our third morning, sliding a business card across her kitchen table. Catherine Wilson. She specializes in high-conflict divorces with financial complications. Catherine's office was modest compared to the gleaming skyscrapers that housed my father's legal team. She reviewed the evidence Frank had gathered, her expression growing more serious with each document. "This goes beyond a simple divorce case," she said finally. "These financial transactions between your husband and father raise serious red flags. And the physical intimidation." She gestured to the fading bruises on my wrist. "We'll file for emergency temporary custody of Jackson immediately." Craig's response came with breathtaking speed. Within 24 hours of my filing, he had secured Manning and Pritchard, one of Connecticut's most expensive law firms. They counterfiled for full custody, claiming I had suffered a mental breakdown and abducted Jackson during a psychotic episode. The most devastating blow came next, a statement from my parents supporting Craig's version of events. My mother claimed I had always been emotionally fragile and had shown increasingly erratic behavior in recent months. My father described me as financially irresponsible and prone to paranoid accusations. Our first court appearance for temporary orders was a nightmare. Craig arrived impeccably dressed, flanked by 2 attorneys and my parents. I had Catherine and Melissa. Judge Harrington, a man in his 60s who belonged to the same country club as my father, presided. Craig's attorney painted me as unstable, citing my paranoid surveillance of my husband and delusional beliefs about financial conspiracies. They presented affidavits from family friends, people I'd known my entire life, describing behavioral changes they'd supposedly observed in me. "Your Honor," Catherine argued, "my client removed herself and her son from a volatile situation after discovering her husband's infidelity and concerning financial irregularities. The bruises documented in our filing demonstrate the very real danger." Judge Harrington barely glanced at our evidence. "Without clear proof of imminent danger to the child, I see no reason for emergency custody. The court orders temporary joint custody until the final hearing. The child will alternate weeks between parents." I nearly collapsed when they took Jackson for his first week with Craig. My 4-year-old clung to me, confused and crying, as Craig firmly pried him away. "Daddy misses you, buddy. We're going to have so much fun at home." Home. The home I'd fled for our safety was now inaccessible to me. When Jackson returned a week later, something was different. He seemed withdrawn, asking strange questions. "Mommy, are you sick?" "Daddy says you're sick in your head." Even more alarming, when I returned to Melissa's apartment after dropping Jackson back with Craig the following week, I found subtle signs that someone had been there. Nothing was obviously disturbed, but items weren't quite where I'd left them. The financial documents and evidence I'd hidden inside a hollowed-out art history textbook were gone. Melissa suggested what I'd been afraid to articulate. "They're buying influence. The judge, the witnesses, maybe even court personnel. Your father has connections throughout the state." Catherine agreed. "This isn't uncommon in high-net-worth cases, especially with influential families. But the missing documents concern me. We need to dig deeper into what your father and husband are hiding that's worth this level of manipulation." I knew then that I wasn't just fighting for custody of Jackson. I was fighting a system that my family had navigated and manipulated for generations. If I wanted to win, I needed to understand exactly what I was up against and find the leverage to fight back. Frank Rossi, my private investigator, suggested we needed to follow the money all the way down the rabbit hole. With Catherine's legal guidance and Melissa's research skills, we began mapping a financial web that sprawled further than I'd imagined. Frank identified several offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands and Switzerland linked to shell companies jointly controlled by Craig and my father. Catherine brought in a forensic accountant who estimated that over $30 million had moved through these accounts in the past 5 years, carefully structured to avoid detection. "This looks like textbook tax evasion," the accountant explained, "but there's more. These patterns suggest possible money laundering, too. The question is, where did the original funds come from?" The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. While searching through old family photo albums I'd grabbed during our escape, I found something strange, a picture from a Watson family Christmas party from 7 years ago, before I'd supposedly met Craig. In the background, partially obscured but unmistakable, was Craig, laughing with my father. "This doesn't make sense," I told Catherine, my hands shaking. "I met Craig at the charity gala 5 years ago. He shouldn't have been at our family Christmas 2 years before that." Frank dug deeper, finding more evidence that Craig had been in my parents' orbit for years. A business registry showed he'd worked briefly for one of my father's subsidiary companies. Alumni records revealed he'd attended the same prep school as my cousin Rebecca, though several years apart. The most damning evidence came from Marion, my father's former executive assistant, who'd retired after 30 years with the company. When Frank approached her, she revealed she'd been troubled by certain practices for years. "Your father hand-selected Craig as a potential husband for you back in 2015, Marion told me during our clandestine meeting at a diner outside New Haven. I overheard him telling your mother that Craig was perfect for their purposes because he was ambitious, malleable, and didn't ask too many questions about where money came from." My hands curled around my coffee cup, knuckles white. "So our meeting wasn't coincidental?" "Nothing in your father's world happens by coincidence, Allison," Marion said sadly. "The charity gala, your chance encounter, it was all orchestrated. Craig was briefed on your interests beforehand. Why do you think he knew so much about architecture when you met?" The revelation that my marriage had been arranged without my knowledge was sickening enough. But Marion had more to share. My father's company had been involved in questionable real estate deals for decades, using family connections to secure properties, manipulate zoning laws, and flip developments at enormous profits. Marriage had always been a business strategy for the Watsons. Your parents' marriage was arranged the same way, Marion explained. Your mother's family had political connections your grandfather needed. It's a pattern going back at least 3 generations. Further investigation revealed that my cousin Rebecca hadn't just been Craig's mistress, she'd been involved with him before our marriage, stepped aside for the arrangement, and resumed the relationship afterward with my parents' knowledge. She'd been promised a position in the family business in exchange for her cooperation. The most shocking discovery came when Catherine obtained records of a prenuptial agreement supposedly signed by me before our wedding. The document gave Craig sweeping control over all financial decisions and limited my claim to any assets in case of divorce. "I never signed this," I told Catherine, staring at the document. "I would remember something this extensive." A forensic document examiner confirmed my signature had been forged. This wasn't just unethical, it was criminal. As we built our case, the intimidation escalated. Anonymous calls warned me to drop the custody case. Melissa's apartment was broken into, with only my documents targeted. Most disturbingly, Jackson returned from Craig's custody reporting that Daddy and Grandpa say you want to take me away because you're confused and sick. Catherine and I documented everything, building a case not just for custody, but potentially for criminal charges. When we presented our findings to her former colleague at the district attorney's office, he listened gravely. "This goes beyond family court issues," he acknowledged. "But these are powerful people with deep connections. You'll need irrefutable evidence and influential allies if you want to pursue this." I knew he was right. To defeat my family's conspiracy, I needed to build my own coalition. It was time to find others who had been damaged by the Watson family schemes and bring everything into the light. If you've ever uncovered a truth that changed everything you thought you knew about your family, drop a comment below. Sometimes exposing these secrets is the only way to break harmful patterns that have continued for generations. This investigation nearly broke me, but what I discovered next gave me the strength to keep fighting. Subscribe to hear how I gathered allies against my own family's dark legacy in the next part of my story. Catherine introduced me to Thomas Blackwell, a former district attorney who'd left public service to focus on cases involving financial abuse and corruption. His office walls displayed photos of him with senators and judges, connections we desperately needed. "Your father's network is extensive," Thomas said after reviewing our evidence, "but he's made enemies over the years. People who've been waiting for an opportunity to bring him down." Thomas connected me with Diane Foster, whose family's construction company had been driven to bankruptcy after partnering with my father on a development project. Contracts had been structured to shift all financial risk to Foster Construction while my father's company reaped the profits. "He promised us the project would establish us among the elite developers," Diane explained bitterly. "Instead, we lost everything while he walked away richer than ever." As word spread discreetly through Thomas's network, more people came forward. A zoning commissioner who'd been pressured to approve questionable permits. A banker who'd been asked to push through loans without proper documentation. Each person provided another piece of the puzzle. Most valuable was Sophia Reeves, Craig's ex-girlfriend from before our marriage. When Frank located her in Chicago, she wasn't surprised to hear from us. "I wondered when this would finally come to light," Sophia said during our video call. "Craig dated me for exactly 18 months. When it became clear my family's political connections weren't what Richard Watson needed, I was discarded. 3 months later, Craig was pursuing you." Sophia revealed that Craig had a pattern. He was repeatedly placed with women from wealthy or influential families, tasked with gathering information and establishing connections beneficial to my father's business empire. "It was never about love or building a genuine family," Sophia explained. "It was about expanding Richard's influence. Craig is essentially a highly paid corporate spy who uses marriage as his cover." With each new ally, our case strengthened. Thomas prepared comprehensive legal strategies while Catherine focused on the custody battle. Frank continued gathering evidence of financial crime substantial enough to interest federal authorities. The turning point came when my brother James reached out unexpectedly. We'd been close as children but had drifted apart after I married Craig. James had always worked in our father's company, though never in a significant role. We met at a small cafe in Hartford, neutral territory far from our family's usual haunts. James looked thinner than I remembered, with dark circles under his eyes. "They're panicking, Allie," he said quietly. "Dad and Craig are shredding documents, closing accounts. They know you're getting close to something big." James confessed he'd been pressured to participate in some of the family's schemes over the years. "Nothing major at first, just being present at meetings, lending my name to certain documents. But lately, they've pushed me to sign things I don't understand. I think they're setting me up to take the fall if things go south." With trembling hands, he slid a USB drive across the table. Financial records, emails, recorded conversations. "I've been collecting evidence for years, never brave enough to use it. But I can't let them do to Jackson what they did to us." The evidence James provided was the smoking gun we needed: direct communications between Craig and my father discussing their arrangement, plans for using my marriage to facilitate business deals, and explicit acknowledgement of tax evasion strategies. Another unexpected ally emerged when my grandmother Marion, my father's mother, reached out through her nurse. At 86, Marion rarely left her suite in the family estate, but she requested I visit her while my parents were at a charity function. Despite her frail appearance, Grandmother Marion's mind remained sharp. From her antique secretary desk, she retrieved a leather portfolio. "Your grandfather kept records of everything," she explained, her veined hands trembling slightly as she opened the portfolio. "The family's true history. Marriage contracts going back to the 1930s. Financial arrangements disguised as love matches. The documents revealed a disturbing pattern spanning generations. My great-grandfather had arranged marriages for his children to secure banking connections. My grandfather had continued the practice, including engineering my parents' union. My own marriage was simply the latest in a dynasty built on convenience and profit rather than love. I was like you once, Grandmother Marion said softly. Brought in from a good family to serve a purpose. I tried to protect your father from becoming like his father, but I failed. Perhaps you can break the cycle for Jackson. Our most unexpected ally came in the form of Harold Bennett, my father's former accountant who had been abruptly fired 3 years earlier. Through Thomas's connections, we learned Harold had been dismissed after questioning certain financial practices. When we approached him, Harold was initially reluctant to get involved. Your father made sure I couldn't work in finance again, he explained. I had to move to Florida, start over at 62. But after reviewing the evidence we'd gathered, Harold agreed to help. This goes beyond unethical, it's criminal. I can identify exactly which transactions violated federal laws and how they structured everything to avoid detection. With our coalition assembled, legal experts, financial whistleblowers, and family insiders, we prepared for battle. Thomas filed careful reports with the FBI's Financial Crimes Unit while Catherine prepared for our custody hearing. The night before our final preparation session, I received an anonymous envelope containing surveillance photos of me with Jackson at his playground, along with a typed note, "Drop the case or lose everything." Instead of frightening me into submission, the threat strengthened my resolve. These people had manipulated me my entire life, orchestrated my marriage, and now threatened my child. The time for fear was over. With allies at my side and truth as my weapon, I was ready for the fight ahead. I should have anticipated how viciously they would respond. 2 days after we filed our amended custody petition including evidence of Craig's manipulation and coercive control, his legal team launched their counterattack. Craig's attorneys filed an emergency motion claiming parental alienation, arguing that my obsessive investigation into family matters demonstrated psychological instability. They requested immediate modification of our custody arrangement, demanding supervised visitation for me. It's a classic Darvo strategy, Catherine explained. Deny, attack, reverse victim and offender. They're painting you as the abuser and Craig as the concerned parent. Judge Harrington, still presiding over our case despite Catherine's concerns about his connections to my father, scheduled an emergency hearing. This time, Craig arrived with not just his legal team and my parents, but also a psychiatrist who had never met me yet had prepared a detailed assessment describing my paranoid personality disorder and delusional fixations. Most shocking was the local newspaper article published the morning of the hearing. The headline read, "Prominent Family Concerned About Daughter's Mental State." The piece quoted my mother describing my history of emotional instability and my father lamenting how wealth and privilege sometimes create unique psychological pressures. The strategy was clear: discredit me publicly before I could expose them. In court, Judge Harrington restricted my parenting time to supervised visits twice weekly, pending psychological evaluation. Leaving the courthouse, I saw Craig's satisfied smile as he guided Jackson to his car, my son looking back at me in confusion. "Mommy, when am I coming home with you?" he called. "Soon, sweetheart," I managed to answer before Craig hurried him away. The following week brought another blow. A social worker appeared at Melissa's apartment, explaining that an anonymous call had reported unsafe living conditions for a child. Though she found nothing concerning during her inspection, she informed me that a formal investigation had been opened. "This is all procedural," Thomas reassured me during our strategy meeting. "They're trying to drown you in allegations and investigations to distract from the real issues and drain your resources." He was right about their strategy, but underestimated their reach. The court-appointed psychologist initially approached me with obvious skepticism, his questions clearly designed to uncover pathology rather than understand my situation. "How long have you believed your family was conspiring against you?" he asked during our first session. "I don't have beliefs. I have evidence," I replied calmly, providing copies of the documents we'd gathered. Catherine and Thomas advised patience. The financial investigation is moving forward, Thomas explained. The FBI has opened a preliminary inquiry based on the evidence we provided. We need to focus on enduring these temporary setbacks while the bigger case develops. Jackson was showing signs of stress during our supervised visits, asking why I couldn't come home and repeating concerning phrases. Daddy says you see things that aren't real, he told me during one visit, his small face serious. He says that's why I can't stay with you until you get better. The court-appointed therapist working with Jackson initially accepted Craig's narrative, but began noting inconsistencies. Jackson mentions being coached on what to say, she noted in her third report. He expresses anxiety about saying the right things to make his father happy. Meanwhile, the court-appointed psychologist's assessment of me was evolving. Mrs. Miller presents as rational and coherent, his preliminary report stated. While under considerable stress, she shows no signs of thought disorder or paranoid ideation. Craig began showing signs of strain as our legal team methodically addressed each allegation while continuing to build our case. During exchanges at supervised visits, I noticed his normally immaculate appearance slipping, his shirt untucked, dark circles under his eyes. 6 weeks into this new arrangement, my father requested a private meeting. Against Catherine's advice but with Thomas's reluctant blessing, I agreed to meet him at a neutral location, a conference room at the public library, with Frank discreetly monitoring from nearby. My father had aged visibly in the months since our estrangement. The confident titan of industry now looked tired, his trademark assurance replaced by nervous energy. This has gone far enough, Allison, he began. You're destroying this family with these wild accusations. They're not accusations, Dad. They're facts, supported by evidence. Evidence you know exists. He switched tactics, his voice softening. We've always wanted what's best for you. Everything we've done, the guidance, the introductions, it was to secure your future. By selecting my husband? By orchestrating my entire life? My father sighed, finally dropping the pretense. The Watson legacy spans generations. Every marriage, every business connection is carefully considered for its contribution to the whole. Your grandfather arranged my marriage to your mother. It wasn't about love, it was about building something greater than ourselves. And that justifies the tax fraud? The money laundering? Using Jackson as a pawn? Business is complex, Allison. Sometimes lines get blurred. But the family always comes first. He leaned forward. I'm prepared to be generous. $5 million, transferred immediately to accounts in your name. Full ownership of the Hamptons property. All we ask is that you drop this custody battle and sign an NDA regarding family business matters. I thought of Jackson asking when he could come home. Of the family legacy of manipulation I was fighting to break. Of the justice that others deserved. No, I said simply. My father's expression hardened. Then you leave us no choice. We will fight with every resource at our disposal. And Allison? We never lose. As he left, I activated the recording device in my purse, capturing his implicit confession and explicit offer of a bribe. Another piece of evidence for our growing case. Catherine filed a motion challenging Judge Harrington's impartiality. Meanwhile, Melissa made a critical discovery while researching the judge's financial disclosures. Judge Harrington's wife sits on the board of a charitable foundation that received substantial donations from shell companies we've linked to your father, she explained, highlighting the relevant documents. It's a clear conflict of interest he never disclosed. We now had grounds to request a new judge, a crucial step toward leveling the playing field for the upcoming custody hearing that would determine Jackson's future. The day of the final custody hearing arrived with a weight of inevitability. Outside the courthouse, news vans gathered. Our family drama had become a local sensation after the financial allegations leaked to the press. Catherine and Thomas arrived early to prepare our exhibits and review strategy. Walking through the heavy wooden doors of Courtroom 3, I immediately spotted my parents seated directly behind Craig. My mother's lips curled into a slight smirk as she whispered something to my father. Craig sat confidently at the plaintiff's table, his attorney arranging documents with practiced efficiency. Our motion for a new judge had been successful, much to my family's visible displeasure. Judge Carolyn Michaels, recently transferred from Boston with no connections to Connecticut's elite circles, would be presiding. "All rise," the bailiff called as Judge Michaels entered, her stern expression revealing nothing of her thoughts. Craig's team presented their case first. His attorney, Martin Sheffield, painted a picture of Craig as the dedicated father, the stabilizing force in Jackson's life. "Your Honor, Mr. Miller has maintained a consistent presence in his son's life despite Mrs. Miller's erratic behavior and unfounded accusations," Sheffield argued. "He has provided structure and security while Mrs. Miller has dragged this family through a destructive campaign based on paranoid delusions." Craig's testimony was masterfully delivered. He described our marriage in glowing terms until Mike's sudden change in behavior. He detailed my obsession with family finances and irrational jealousy regarding his business relationship with my father. "I've only wanted what's best for Jackson," Craig said, his voice catching slightly. "Allison's instability has forced me to protect him. I still hope she gets the help she needs." Sheffield called a parade of witnesses, family, friends, associates from my father's company, even our former nanny, all testifying to Craig's parenting skills and my supposed instability. Then came the testimony I dreaded most. My mother took the stand, immaculately dressed in a conservative navy suit, pearl earrings catching the fluorescent light. "Eleanor has always been." She paused, correcting herself. "Allison has always been emotionally fragile. As a child, she created elaborate fantasies when reality didn't match her expectations. This pattern has unfortunately continued into adulthood." "And have you observed Mrs. Miller's behavior with her son?" Sheffield asked. "She loves Jackson," my mother admitted, "but love isn't always enough. Her erratic behavior, these wild accusations about family conspiracies, they're not healthy for a child. Craig provides the stability Jackson needs." My father's testimony was more calculated, focusing on my financial irresponsibility and tendency toward dramatic overreaction. He carefully avoided mentioning his business dealings with Craig, describing their relationship as a standard mentor-protégé connection. By lunch recess, I felt hollowed out. Catherine squeezed my hand. "They've played their strongest cards," she reassured me. "This afternoon is our turn." When court reconvened, Thomas presented a motion that changed everything. "Your Honor, we have evidence that Craig Miller and Richard Watson engaged in improper communication with Judge Harrington regarding this case, constituting judicial misconduct." He presented financial records showing donations to Judge Harrington's wife's foundation from shell companies connected to my father, along with phone records documenting calls between my father and the judge during critical periods of our case. Judge Michaels reviewed the evidence with a deepening frown. After a tense 15 minutes, she ruled, "The court finds sufficient cause for concern regarding potential judicial misconduct. All prior rulings in this case are hereby vacated pending full review." Craig's attorney objected vehemently, but the damage was done. The playing field had been reset. Catherine began our case methodically, establishing my successful career, my close relationship with Jackson, and the timeline of my growing awareness of Craig's manipulation. When I took the stand, I felt eerily calm. "Ms. Watson," Catherine began, using my maiden name by prior agreement, "please describe when you first became concerned about your marriage." I detailed the gradual isolation, the financial control, the gaslighting. I described finding evidence of Craig's affair with my cousin and the disturbing financial transactions between him and my father. "Objection, Your Honor," Sheffield interrupted. "Mrs. Miller is making unsubstantiated accusations about financial matters irrelevant to custody determination." "On the contrary," Thomas interjected, "these financial dealings speak directly to Mr. Miller's character and the environment in which the child would be raised." Judge Michaels allowed me to continue. I presented the recordings, documents, and witness statements we'd gathered. I explained discovering that my marriage had been arranged without my knowledge for business purposes, documented by prenuptial papers with my forged signature. During cross-examination, Sheffield tried to provoke an emotional reaction. Isn't it true that you've created this elaborate conspiracy theory to explain the failure of your marriage rather than accepting your own responsibility? No, I replied calmly. I've documented every claim with evidence that can be independently verified. The courtroom hushed when we called our surprise witness, my brother James. Craig's face registered shock as James was sworn in. My mother clutched my father's arm. James testified about the family's pattern of arranged marriages, about overhearing discussions between our father and Craig regarding their arrangement before I'd even met Craig. He described being pressured to lie about financial transactions and his growing concern for Jackson's welfare. Our family operates like a business where people are assets to be managed, James explained, his voice steady despite my father's glare. Allison refused to be managed. That's her only crime. Grandmother Marion testified next via video deposition due to her health, providing historical context about the family's pattern of marriages arranged for business advantage. Her dignified presence and clear recollections of specific conversations carried immense credibility. As our case built momentum, Craig's composure cracked. During a particularly damning testimony from his former business associate about financial improprieties, Craig stood abruptly. "This is all lies," he shouted. "They're trying to destroy me because I know too much." "Mr. Miller, control yourself," Judge Michaels warned. During the next recess, Sheffield approached with a settlement offer: joint legal custody, primary physical custody to me, generous visitation for Craig, and no further financial investigations. I declined without hesitation. The final day of testimony featured our forensic financial expert connecting the dots between offshore accounts, shell companies, and tax evasion schemes involving both Craig and my father. The court-appointed psychologist's updated assessment described me as a woman under extraordinary stress showing remarkable resilience with no evidence of psychological disorder. Most powerful was Jackson's therapist, who testified about signs of emotional manipulation during his time with Craig. Jackson reports being told repeatedly that his mother is sick and makes up stories, she explained. He shows anxiety about saying the wrong thing and disappointing his father. These are concerning indicators of potential psychological control. As closing arguments approached, I felt a strange calm. Whatever the outcome, the truth was finally in the open. The facade my family had maintained for generations was cracking, exposing the manipulation and exploitation beneath the veneer of respectability. Judge Michaels delivered her ruling after 3 days of deliberation. The courtroom was packed with reporters, family connections, and curious onlookers drawn by the salacious details that had emerged during testimony. In the matter of custody regarding minor child Jackson Miller, Judge Michaels began, "The court finds clear and convincing evidence that the child's best interests are served by granting primary physical custody to Allison Watson, with Craig Miller granted supervised visitation pending completion of parenting classes and psychological evaluation." She continued with a damning assessment of the evidence presented. "This court is deeply troubled by the pattern of manipulation, coercion, and dishonesty demonstrated by Mr. Miller. The court is forwarding evidence of potentially criminal financial activities to appropriate authorities for further investigation." Craig's face contorted with rage. "This is corruption," he shouted, lunging toward the bench. Bailiffs quickly restrained him as Judge Michaels ordered him removed from the courtroom. As we exited the courthouse, reporters thrust microphones toward us. Catherine handled the brief statement while Thomas guided me toward our waiting car. Through the crowd, I glimpsed my parents' shocked expressions as they hurried toward their town car. The most surprising sight awaited at the bottom of the courthouse steps: 2 men in dark suits approaching my father, showing credentials. FBI agents, beginning their official investigation based on the financial evidence presented in court. The public unraveling of my family happened with stunning speed. Within days, the Hartford Courier ran a front-page exposé on the Watson family financial empire with details of questionable real estate deals spanning decades. Former business partners, emboldened by the public scrutiny, came forward with their own stories of manipulation and fraud. My mother called late that night, her voice slurred either from emotion or alcohol. "How could you do this to us?" she demanded. "We gave you everything. You gave me a life built on lies, I replied quietly. I didn't destroy the family, Mom. I just exposed the rot that was already there. You have no idea what you've done, she hissed before hanging up. James called the next morning. Dad's lawyers are working overtime, he warned. But the evidence is too substantial to disappear. The FBI has seized records from the company offices. Are you okay? I asked, concerned about his position in the fallout. Better than I've been in years, he admitted. I've been cooperating with the investigation. Full immunity in exchange for testimony. My grandmother Marion surprised everyone by publicly supporting me, moving out of the family estate into a smaller property near my new apartment. I've watched this family destroy lives for 3 generations, she told me over tea in her new sunlit living room. It's about time someone had the courage to break the cycle. The first supervised visit between Jackson and Craig was tense. Craig had lost weight, his designer clothes hanging loosely on his frame. He brought expensive gifts, which the supervisor gently explained weren't permitted during these sessions. Daddy seems sad, Jackson observed afterward. Sometimes people feel sad when things change, I explained carefully. But everyone is working to make sure you feel safe and loved. As the financial investigation intensified, Craig's behavior became increasingly erratic. During one supervised visit, he attempted to question Jackson about where we were living and who we were seeing. The supervisor terminated the visit immediately. 3 months after the custody ruling, federal prosecutors filed charges against Craig and my father for tax evasion, wire fraud, and money laundering. The indictment detailed decades of financial schemes, with Craig serving as a key facilitator in recent years. My mother's public breakdown came during the annual Children's Hospital benefit she had chaired for 15 years. Mid-speech, she began ranting about ungrateful children and family loyalty, before being gently escorted from the podium by concerned board members. The social fallout was complex and painful. Longtime family friends divided into camps, those who'd always suspected something was amiss in the Watson empire and those who remained loyal to my parents. Former clients of my father's firm filed lawsuits seeking to recover funds lost through questionable investments. Through it all, Jackson remained my primary focus. His therapist helped us navigate the turbulent waters of family transformation. We established new routines, created new traditions. For Halloween, he wanted to be an architect like Mommy, wearing a hard hat and carrying rolled-up building plans as we trick-or-treated through our new neighborhood. I sold my engagement ring, using the proceeds to establish a small foundation providing legal assistance to victims of financial abuse. The architecture firm that had once employed me offered a position with flexible hours to accommodate my parenting responsibilities. I accepted, grateful to reconnect with my professional identity. 6 months after the custody ruling, I received an unexpected call from my mother's sister, Aunt Patricia. We had never been close, she had distanced herself from the family years ago, something I now better understood. Your mother is seeing a therapist, Patricia explained. She's beginning to recognize her own victimization in all this. Your grandfather essentially purchased her from her family through business arrangements with her father. She was 18, hardly more than a child herself. Understanding my mother as another link in the chain of manipulation rather than simply its perpetuator created complicated emotions. The black and white clarity of righteous anger gave way to shades of gray, recognition that generational trauma had shaped us all. In a strange irony, the family estate, the symbol of Watson prestige for generations, was sold to cover legal costs and potential restitution. Watching movers pack up the heirloom furniture and artwork that had intimidated me throughout childhood felt like witnessing the dismantling of a museum dedicated to appearances and deception. The most healing moment came unexpectedly. Jackson, helping me unpack books in our new apartment, found an old photo of me as a child with my parents. Was Grandma Eleanor always mean? He asked innocently. The question opened a conversation about family history, about how people sometimes repeat the hurts they experienced, about how we were working to create something different for our future. Sometimes people do bad things because bad things were done to them, I explained. But we always have a choice to be better. Jackson considered this with the serious contemplation only a 5-year-old can muster. "I think you made a good choice, Mommy." In that moment, I knew that despite the pain and loss, breaking my family's legacy of manipulation was worth every sacrifice. If your family has hidden patterns of control or manipulation, remember that breaking those cycles isn't betrayal, it's courage. It took losing almost everything I thought I had to discover what really matters. If this story has resonated with you, please subscribe for more insights on recognizing and escaping toxic family dynamics. Share your own experiences in the comments below. Your story might help someone else recognize the red flags I missed for so long. 1 year after the custody ruling, Jackson and I celebrated with a small party in our cozy 3-bedroom home in a family-friendly neighborhood far from Greenwich's manicured estates. Melissa, Catherine, Thomas, James, and grandmother Marion gathered around a homemade cake as Jackson blew out the candle. "Make a wish, but don't tell or it won't come true," I reminded him. Jackson squeezed his eyes shut with fierce concentration before blowing out the flame. "I don't mind telling," he announced. I wished for more days like this. The simplicity of his wish reflected our new life, built on authenticity rather than appearances. Craig had accepted a plea deal, testifying against my father in exchange for reduced charges. He was serving 18 months in a minimum security facility, with early release possible for good behavior. Our divorce was finalized, with Craig relinquishing all claims to marital assets in exchange for reduced restitution payments. My father remained under house arrest in a modest condominium while awaiting trial, his case complicated by the expanding investigation that now encompassed decades of financial manipulation. The Watson empire had crumbled, with receivers sorting through the tangled web of legitimate and fraudulent business dealings. Most surprising was my mother's evolution. After her public breakdown, she had entered intensive therapy, gradually confronting the reality of her own manipulation as a young woman. Her therapist suggested that her participation in perpetuating the family's toxic patterns stemmed partly from trauma bonding and partly from a desperate attempt to create meaning from her own exploitation. Our reconciliation began tentatively, with supervised visits with Jackson and carefully bounded conversations. "I don't expect forgiveness," she told me during our 3rd meeting. "But I hope for understanding, eventually." "I'm working on it," I replied honestly. "For both our sakes." Jackson thrived in his new school, making friends easily and showing an early talent for mathematics and art. His nightmares about saying the wrong things gradually subsided, replaced by the ordinary developmental concerns of a kindergartner. His therapist noted his resilience with admiration. "Children can adapt remarkably well when provided stability, honesty, and unconditional love," she explained during our final session. "You've given him all 3. My professional life took an unexpected turn when my firm assigned me to design a women's resource center. The project reconnected me with my passion for creating spaces that fostered healing and community. I incorporated elements that subtly encouraged transparency, abundant natural light, clear sightlines, spaces that balanced privacy with openness. The design won a regional award, leading to similar commissions. I found myself developing a specialty in trauma-informed architecture, consulting on projects for domestic violence shelters and family therapy centers. Parallel to my architecture work, I established the Financial Autonomy Foundation, using my divorce settlement to fund legal assistance and financial literacy programs for survivors of economic abuse. Catherine joined the board, along with several other attorneys specializing in high-conflict divorces involving financial manipulation. Family dinners evolved into a new tradition: James, grandmother Marion, occasionally Melissa, or Catherine, gathering around my dining table for simple meals where conversation flowed freely. Jackson loved these evenings, especially when James taught him chess or grandmother Marion shared sanitized versions of family history. 6 months into his incarceration, Craig requested a meeting. After consulting with Jackson's therapist and my own, I agreed to a supervised visit at the correctional facility. Craig had aged dramatically, his once immaculate appearance now institutional and worn. "I've had a lot of time to think," he began awkwardly. "The therapist here says I should take responsibility for my actions without qualifications." That seems wise, I replied neutrally. I was raised to see relationships as transactions, he continued. My father taught me that everyone has a price, a lever that can be pulled. When your father approached me about you, it seemed like a perfect business arrangement. I didn't expect to develop actual feelings? I suggested when he faltered. Maybe. Or maybe just a conscience. He looked down at his hands. Jackson deserves better than what I can give him right now. I'm trying to become someone who might eventually deserve to be in his life. I left the prison with complicated emotions. Craig's manipulation had been calculated and cruel, yet he himself had been shaped by similar forces. Breaking cycles of exploitation required acknowledging their origins without excusing their perpetuation. As Jackson approached his 6th birthday, he asked increasingly thoughtful questions about our family. One evening, as I tucked him into bed, he surprised me. Do bad people know they're bad, Mommy? I considered how to answer. Most people don't think they're bad, sweetheart. They tell themselves stories about why the things they do are okay or necessary. That's why it's important to always think about how our actions affect others, not just what we want. He nodded seriously. Like how Grandpa Richard told himself stories about the business? Exactly like that. My journey from controlled daughter to autonomous woman became the framework for a memoir I began writing during quiet evenings. Architectures of Control, Building and Breaking Family Systems wasn't intended for publication initially, just for Jackson to understand his heritage when he was older. But Catherine suggested the manuscript might help others recognize patterns of financial and emotional manipulation in their own lives. The book led to speaking engagements at conferences for family court attorneys and domestic violence advocates. During a presentation in Boston, I noticed my mother slipping into the back row, attempting anonymity behind large sunglasses. She remained through the entire talk, approaching tentatively afterward. You spoke about patterns across generations, she said. About how awareness creates choice points for change. It's what I believe, I replied. I never had your courage, she admitted. By the time I recognized what was happening, I felt too entangled to escape. So I convinced myself it was what I wanted. It wasn't an apology exactly, but it was an acknowledgement, perhaps the most honest exchange we'd ever had. Establishing boundaries while allowing for healing required constant vigilance and reassessment. I permitted my mother limited, supervised time with Jackson, contingent on her continued therapy. My father remained at a distance, his legal troubles mounting as former business partners sought immunity by revealing additional schemes. 2 years after the custody hearing, we held a small gathering to celebrate Jackson's official adoption of my maiden name. James, grandmother Marion, Melissa, Catherine, Thomas, and even my mother gathered in the judge's chambers as Jackson proudly announced his new name, Jackson Richard Watson. I had questioned his desire to keep my father's name as his middle name. It's still part of our history, Mom, he'd explained with wisdom beyond his years. We can remember without repeating. The modified family we created, chosen connections strengthened by truth rather than obligation, gathered for Thanksgiving that year. My mother, tentatively included, brought her famous cranberry relish. James carved the turkey. Grandmother Marion supervised Jackson making place cards for everyone. Thomas brought his new partner, further expanding our circle. As I watched Jackson navigating this assembly of people connected by complex bonds of blood, choice, loyalty, and shared history, I reflected on the strength I hadn't known I possessed until forced to find it. The architecture of our new family remained under construction, its foundation now built on transparency rather than deception. That evening, tucking Jackson into bed, he asked sleepily, "Are we a normal family now, Mom?" I smiled, stroking his hair. "We're an honest family." "That's better than normal." He considered this, then nodded. "I like our family better this way too." The journey from controlled daughter to autonomous woman, from manipulated wife to protective mother, had cost nearly everything I once valued: social position, family connections, financial security. Yet it had given me something far more precious: the freedom to build a life and family based on love and respect rather than control and appearance. Have you ever had to remake your life after discovering painful family truths? Your story matters and might help others recognize patterns they're struggling to name. Please share your experiences in the comments below. If this story of breaking generational patterns resonated with you, hit that subscribe button for more content exploring family dynamics and the courage to create change. Leave a like if you believe in the power of truth to heal even the deepest family wounds, and share with someone who might need to hear that standing up for yourself isn't selfish, it's often the bravest form of love. Thank you for witnessing my journey from betrayal to rebuilding. Until next time, remember that your worth isn't determined by your family's dysfunction, and it's never too late to create a new legacy.